You will not defeat me anymore. Introduction. In every human life, there comes a silent moment. A moment so quiet that no one else can hear it. A moment where there is no applause, no audience watching, no cameras recording, no friends noticing what is happening inside you. And yet, that very moment becomes the turning point of everything. It is the moment when a person stands face to face with themselves for the very first time, with complete honesty, far away from excuses, far away from lies we tell ourselves, far away from the masks we have worn for years in front of the world. And it is in that exact moment that everything begins. Maybe you are living in one of those moments right now. Perhaps you are listening to these words while feeling exhausted. Perhaps you are tired of trying, tired of waiting, tired of watching life move forward while feeling stuck in the same place. And maybe you have slowly started doubting whether you are truly capable of reaching the life you dream about. If that is how you feel, then understand this: you are not alone, because almost every person who has ever achieved greatness has stood exactly where you stand now, in the same darkness, in the same uncertainty, in the same internal battle. The difference between them and everyone else was never that they never failed. It was simply this: they refused to stay on the ground. This is not the story of a superhero. This is not the story of someone born special. This is not the story of a gifted genius who had everything figured out. No. This is the story of an ordinary human being, a person just like millions of others. Someone who eventually discovered a truth so powerful that it completely transformed his life forever. He discovered that true defeat does not come from the outside world, it begins from within. And that the most dangerous enemy a person will ever face is not poverty, it is not failure, it is not difficult circumstances, it is not other people. It is something far more dangerous, living deep inside the mind. A voice that whispers every single day, "You are not capable enough. You are already too late. You will never succeed. You do not deserve success." And this is the story of the battle against that voice. A story about falling, about rising, about transformation. The story of a man who one day finally said to himself, "You will not defeat me anymore."
Welcome to Beacon of Books, where we turn the world's best books once into concise and powerful insights you can learn in just minutes.
Chapter 1, The First Fall. It was almost midnight. The entire city seemed ready to fall asleep. The streets were quiet. The lights inside nearby buildings slowly disappeared one by one. The world was preparing for rest, but Adam could not sleep. He sat alone on the edge of his bed, holding his phone, turning the screen on, turning it off, then on again, then off again. He wasn't really doing anything. He was simply looking for distraction, anything that could save him from his own thoughts. But thoughts are faster than distraction. And tonight, they were winning. On the small table beside him sat dozens of papers, old plans, half-finished projects, dreams he had written months ago and forgotten, ideas he once believed would change his life. He stared at them for a long time, then suddenly felt something heavy pressing against his chest. It wasn't sadness, not exactly. It was something deeper, a mixture of disappointment, fear, regret, and silent frustration. Adam was 27 years old, but deep inside, he felt as if life had already left him behind. He watched his friends moving forward. One had secured a successful career, another had started his own business. Someone else had bought his first house. Everyone seemed to be building something. Everyone except him. He felt trapped inside an endless cycle. Every year he created new goals. Every year he promised himself change, and every year those goals ended exactly where they started. As words on paper, nothing more. That night, his mind drifted backward, back to when he was 16 years old. He remembered who he used to be. A young boy full of ambition. A boy who believed the world was waiting for him. Someone who truly believed that hard work guaranteed success. Back then, he looked at life differently. He saw possibilities, not obstacles. He saw opportunity, not fear. But slowly, something began changing. The first major blow came when he failed to achieve something he deeply cared about. It was the first time life hit him hard. The first time he truly understood disappointment. At first, he told himself it was temporary, just a small setback. But then came another failure, then another, and slowly, without noticing, his confidence began disappearing. Not suddenly, but gradually, like a rock being slowly eroded by drops of water. One drop, then another, and another, until eventually it changed shape completely. Years passed, and fear became part of his identity. He no longer feared failure alone. Now he feared trying itself. Whenever a new opportunity appeared, he hesitated. Whenever he thought about taking action, he stepped backward. Whenever he moved closer to his dreams, a familiar voice inside whispered, "Don't waste your energy. You have tried before. You already know how this ends." At first, he resisted that voice. Then he started believing it, and eventually it became part of the way he saw himself. One day, a remarkable opportunity appeared in front of him. It was everything he had been waiting for, everything he had dreamed about for years. But instead of excitement, he felt terror. His mind immediately imagined failure, embarrassment, loss, humiliation, and in the end, he walked away, not because the opportunity was bad, not because he lacked talent, but because deep down, he did not believe in himself. Months later, he watched someone else take that exact same opportunity and succeed beyond imagination. That day, he felt something painful. It wasn't jealousy, it was realization. A brutal realization. He discovered that his biggest losses in life were not caused by the mistakes he made, but by the actions he never took, the opportunities fear stole from him, the dreams he postponed, the decisions he never had the courage to make. The realization hurt deeply, but strangely, it still was not enough to change him, because sometimes a person understands the problem yet still lacks the courage to face it. So life continued. Day after day, nothing changed, until one evening, the evening that would change everything forever. Adam returned home exhausted. It had been a long and draining day. He opened the door, dropped his bag on the floor, and sat down in complete silence. No television, no phone, no music, nothing. He simply sat there, too tired to run away from himself anymore. Then something unusual happened. As he stared into the empty room, his entire life began replaying in his mind. All the old dreams, all the abandoned plans, all the missed opportunities, all the excuses, and suddenly, he noticed something disturbing. There was a pattern. Every single time life presented him with an opportunity, fear appeared. Every single time success came close, doubt pulled him backward. Every single time he wanted progress, he waited for the perfect moment, and the perfect moment never came. He sat there for a long time, thinking. Then he asked himself the most dangerous question he had ever asked in his entire life. What if my problem was never circumstances? What if my problem was never other people? What if my problem was never bad luck? What if I'm the one standing in my own way? Time stopped. At least that is how it felt, because the question struck him deeply. For years, he had searched for answers outside himself, blaming circumstances, blaming luck, blaming people, blaming timing. But he had never looked inward, not once, and for the very first time, he saw the truth. The truth was painful but undeniable. He was never a victim, he was never powerless. He was simply afraid, more afraid than he ever realized, and fear had been controlling his life, not his dreams, not his values, not his ambitions. Fear, that night. He stood up slowly, walked toward the mirror, stared at his reflection, and remained silent for several minutes. Then finally whispered, I am tired of running, tired of excuses, tired of waiting, tired of watching life pass in front of me while I stand here doing nothing." Silence filled the room again. Then he said something else. "If there truly is an enemy inside my life, I will face it no matter what it costs me." For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar. Not happiness, not excitement, something deeper, clarity. The kind of clarity he had not felt for years. It felt like living inside thick fog for a very long time, and suddenly seeing the road ahead. He still did not know how he would change. He had no idea what tomorrow would look like, but he knew one thing: he could no longer continue living this way. Tomorrow had to be different. That night, he turned off the lights, lay down on his bed, and before closing his eyes, he whispered a single sentence. A sentence no one heard, a sentence that would eventually become the beginning of an entirely new life. Tomorrow, I begin again. And sometimes, the greatest victories in human life begin with one quiet decision made alone, in the middle of the night. You will not defeat me anymore. Chapter 2. The Invisible Prison. Adam woke up the next morning feeling something unfamiliar. Nothing around him had changed. The same walls, The same small bedroom. The same alarm clock that had dragged him out of bed every morning for years. Everything looked exactly the same, but inside, something had shifted. A question from the night before still echoed loudly inside his mind. What if I am the one standing in my own way? He tried to ignore it. He walked to the bathroom, washed his face, made coffee, looked out the window, but the question refused to leave. It followed him everywhere, and for the first time in years, instead of watching the world around him, he started watching himself. For so long, Adam had spent his life observing others, watching their success, watching their achievements, watching their progress, comparing their lives to his own. But now, for the very first time, he turned inward, and that was where the real journey began. Over the next few days, Adam made a strange decision. He bought a notebook. Nothing expensive, nothing special, just a simple blank notebook, and on the very first page, he wrote a single question. What is stopping me from moving forward? He stared at the question for several minutes, then slowly began writing. At first, only random words appeared: fear, anxiety, procrastination, self-doubt, shyness, fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of making mistakes. Then suddenly he stopped writing, because he noticed something disturbing. Almost everything he had written started with one word: fear. It was everywhere, hidden behind every decision he had made, present inside every opportunity he had abandoned. It was as if fear had been driving his life for years, while he sat helplessly in the passenger seat. That night, his thoughts drifted back to childhood, and suddenly, he remembered something he had completely forgotten, a memory buried deep in his past. He was 10 years old. Standing in front of his classmates at school, he had been asked to give a short presentation. He'd practiced for hours, memorized every sentence perfectly. He was excited, confident, ready. But the moment he started speaking, he mispronounced a word. A few students laughed. It wasn't cruel laughter. It wasn't even a serious moment. Most people probably forgot about it within minutes. But for a 10-year-old child, it felt enormous, humiliating, painful. That day, something invisible happened. Without realizing it, young Adam made a decision. Never put yourself in that position again. Years passed. He forgot the memory. But the decision remained alive inside him. Every time he needed to speak publicly, he hesitated. Every time he needed confidence, he withdrew. Every time he wanted attention, he disappeared. And now he understood why. One tiny moment from childhood had quietly shaped years of his adult life. And suddenly, he understood something profound. Some prisons are not built from steel. They are built from memory. Over the next several days, more memories started resurfacing. Words people once said to him. Old criticism, embarrassing moments, small failures, painful experiences, insignificant mistakes. Normal events most people would forget, but his mind had not forgotten them. His subconscious had preserved them. And slowly, without permission, it had built walls around him, walls carrying silent messages. You are not good enough, you are weak. You are different from successful people. You always fail. You are behind everyone else. And because he heard these messages long enough, he began believing them, not as opinions, but as truth, even though none of them were true. A few days later, Adam came across a sentence online that stopped him completely. It said, "The mind believes whatever you repeatedly tell it." He read it once, then again, and suddenly questions began exploding inside his mind. If I have spent years telling myself I am weak, how can I expect confidence? If I keep repeating that I will fail, how can I expect success? If I constantly see myself as defeated, how could I ever become victorious? And for the first time, he realized something terrifying. The problem was not only his circumstances. The problem was the story he had been telling himself every single day. A story so negative that his own mind had accepted it as reality. One evening, Adam left home and went walking. The weather was cold. Dark clouds covered the sky. The wind moved quietly through empty streets. As he entered a small public park, he noticed an elderly man sitting alone on a bench, feeding birds, silent, calm, peaceful. Adam sat a short distance away. Several minutes passed in silence. Then suddenly, without even looking at him, the old man spoke. "You look like someone carrying something heavy." Adam turned toward him, surprised, then smiled faintly. "How did you know?" The old man smiled. "Because I used to carry the same weight." Silence returned. Then the old man continued. "Most people think their problems come from the outside world, but they eventually discover the most dangerous chains exist inside their own minds." Adam listened carefully. The old man leaned slightly forward, then asked quietly, "Do you know how they train baby elephants?" Adam shook his head. The old man said, "When an elephant is young, they tie its leg to a small wooden stake using a weak rope. The baby elephant tries escaping again and again, hundreds of times, but it fails every time. Eventually, it stops trying. Then years pass. The elephant grows enormous, strong enough to tear down trees, powerful enough to break free instantly, but strangely, they continue tying it with the same weak rope. And do you know what happens?" Adam stayed silent. The old man smiled sadly. "It never tries escaping, not because it cannot, but because it believes it cannot." The words hit Adam harder than anything he had heard in months. The old man looked directly into his eyes. "A lot of people live exactly like that elephant, strong enough to change their lives, yet imprisoned by beliefs created years ago, not by reality, but by memory." That night, Adam returned home unable to stop thinking, could I be living exactly like that? Could I be stronger than I believe? Could most of my limits simply be illusions created by old experiences? Sleep abandoned him. His mind raced for hours. And by sunrise, he made another decision, a small one, but powerful. He would begin testing his limitations. One by one, the next day, he did something he had avoided for years, at work. He shared his opinion during a meeting. His heart raced violently. His hands felt tense. His voice shook slightly, but he spoke. And then, nothing happened. No one laughed. No one mocked him. The world did not collapse. The next day, he started a conversation with a stranger. Then another small challenge. Then another. Then another. And something shocking began happening. Most things he feared were never as terrifying as he had imagined. He had been living inside stories created entirely by his own mind, stories that felt real, but were never reality. Weeks passed, and slowly the walls began cracking the invisible prison he had spent years building. It was not collapsing overnight, but cracks had appeared, and sometimes one crack is enough, because every prison begins falling apart the moment its walls begin breaking. One evening, Adam opened his notebook once again. He looked at the first question he had written. "What is stopping me from moving forward?" He smiled, then wrote a new sentence beneath it. "I thought life had imprisoned me, but I have discovered that I was imprisoned by my own thoughts." He closed the notebook, walked toward the window, looked up at the night sky, and for the first time in many years, freedom felt possible, not because his life had changed, but because he had started changing. And the truth is, the most dangerous prisons in life are never the ones surrounding the body. They are the ones living inside the mind. And once the mind begins breaking free, everything becomes possible. But Adam did not know yet that everything he had discovered so far was only the beginning, because somewhere deep inside him, another enemy was waiting, an enemy even more dangerous than fear itself. Silent, invisible, patient, and very soon he would have to face it. That enemy had a name, habit, and the next battle was about to begin. Chapter 3. The enemy no one sees. Weeks had passed. Little by little, Adam could feel something changing inside him. He was no longer the same person who automatically ran away from every challenge. He had begun understanding himself better. His fears no longer controlled him the way they once had. For the first time in years, he felt progress, small progress, but real progress. And yet, something strange was happening. Despite everything he had learned, despite all the self-awareness he had gained, his life still had not changed the way he expected. The knowledge was there, the understanding was there, the desire for change was stronger than ever, but reality still looked almost the same, and that frustrated him. One evening, he sat alone at his desk, opened his notebook, and began reading every page he had written during the past few weeks. His fears, his realizations, his memories, his discoveries, the patterns he had uncovered inside his own mind. He read everything slowly, then finally closed the notebook. Leaning back in his chair, he stared at the ceiling and quietly asked himself a dangerous question. If I understand the problem, why is my life still the same? It was an important question, perhaps the most important question he had asked so far. Because understanding something does not automatically change it. You can know exactly what road leads to success and still never walk on it. You can understand perfectly how discipline works and still remain undisciplined. You can know exactly what needs to be done and spend years doing the exact opposite. And that was the moment Adam discovered a new enemy. An enemy far more dangerous than fear, an enemy people rarely recognize because unlike fear, it does not scream, it does not attack openly, it moves quietly, patiently, slowly stealing dreams without anyone noticing. Its name was procrastination. At first, Adam had never seen procrastination as a serious problem. Like most people, he had normalized it. He constantly told himself the same lies. I will start tomorrow. I need more time. I am not fully ready yet. Next week will be better. I will do it when the conditions improve. I still have plenty of time, but tomorrow always came, then disappeared, then turned into next week, then next month, then next year. And before he realized it, entire years of his life had quietly vanished, all hidden behind one dangerous word. Later, that was what made procrastination terrifying. It never looks like an enemy. It sounds gentle, comforting, reasonable. It whispers softly, relax. You deserve rest. You can begin tomorrow. There is no urgency. Take your time. And while you listen, it quietly steals your future. The next morning, Adam decided to do something unusual. He would observe his entire day, every minute, from the moment he woke up until the moment he fell asleep, and what he discovered shocked him. He noticed how many tiny moments he wasted without awareness. 5 minutes checking his phone became 30 minutes. One short video online turned into an hour. A quick break became an entire afternoon. He believed for years that his problem was lack of time. But now he saw the truth clearly. The problem was never time. The problem was how he used time. And suddenly he realized something deeply uncomfortable. People do not lose their lives all at once. They lose them minute by minute, small, invisible moments, accumulating silently over years. Later that evening, Adam remembered an old story he once heard as a child. It was about a man trying to cut down a massive tree. Everyone around him laughed. Impossible, they said. The tree was enormous, too strong, too old, too deeply rooted. But the man never tried cutting it down with one powerful strike. Instead, he hit it once. Every single day, one strike. Then another tomorrow, then another. Day after day, month after month, until one day, the tree finally collapsed, and people watching said something foolish. The final strike brought it down, but the truth was different. The final strike did nothing alone. Every strike before it mattered equally. Adam sat quietly thinking, then suddenly said aloud, "If small actions repeated long enough can bring down a giant tree, then perhaps small habits repeated long enough can build an entirely new life." And that thought changed everything. The next morning, he made a new decision. He would stop trying to change everything at once. Instead, he would focus on winning one small battle, just one. Nothing dramatic, nothing overwhelming. He set one simple promise: wake up at exactly the planned hour, that was all. No excuses. The following day, he did it again, then again, then again. The task seemed ridiculously small, but something strange began happening. Every small promise he kept increased his confidence. Every act of discipline strengthened his relationship with himself, and slowly he understood something powerful. Confidence is not a magical feeling people suddenly wake up with. Confidence is built through repeated proof. Every time you keep a promise made to yourself, you build trust. Every time you betray your own word, you destroy it. Weeks passed. Adam became increasingly disciplined, but the battle remained difficult. There was still an old voice trying to pull him backward. The voice of comfort, the voice of delay, the voice of excuses. Some mornings, he woke up motivated, full of energy, ready to conquer the world. Other mornings, he wanted nothing more than staying in bed. In the past, he always waited for motivation, but now he had learned something life-changing. Successful people do not depend on motivation. They depend on commitment. Because motivation visits temporarily. But commitment stays when motivation disappears. And commitment changes lives. One rainy afternoon, Adam sat inside a quiet coffee shop. Outside, water moved slowly down the windows. Inside, soft conversations filled the room. At the table beside him, two men were talking. One of them said quietly, "I wish I had the willpower successful people have." The second man smiled, then answered, "I do not think successful people have stronger willpower. I think they simply have better habits." Adam froze. The words hit him instantly. Better habits. Not better talent, not better luck, not easier circumstances, not superior intelligence. Better habits. And suddenly he began noticing something fascinating. Every successful person he had ever admired shared one thing in common: small, consistent behaviors. Simple actions repeated daily. Meanwhile, most people do extraordinary things occasionally, then disappear for weeks. And the difference between success and failure was consistency, not intensity. Months later, Adam sat alone reviewing his progress. He remembered the version of himself that existed only a short time ago. The man who delayed everything. The man who constantly made excuses. The man waiting forever for perfect conditions. Then he looked at himself now. Had he become rich? No. Had he become famous? No. Had he achieved some extraordinary breakthrough? Not yet. But something much deeper had changed. He had begun trusting himself, and he realized something important. Self-trust is more valuable than temporary success. Achievements can disappear, money can vanish, opportunities can be lost. But the character you build inside yourself stays forever. That night, he opened his notebook once again, turned to a blank page, and wrote a sentence. Short, simple, but powerful enough to change the rest of his life. My life is not shaped by what I do occasionally. It is shaped by what I do every single day. He stared at the sentence for a long time, then quietly closed the notebook, turned off the lights, and lay down in bed. For the first time in years, he felt something he had forgotten existed: control. He was beginning to take control of his own life again. Slowly, one habit at a time, one decision at a time, one ordinary day after another. But while Adam believed his path was becoming clearer, life had prepared another challenge, a far greater test, one that would put everything he had learned under pressure. A test that would reveal whether he had truly changed, or whether the old version of him was still alive. And this test carried a name every human being knows, a name feared since the beginning of time: failure. And soon it would return, again. Chapter 4. When failure returned again. There are moments in life when a person begins believing they have finally outgrown their weakness. Moments when you feel stronger, wiser, more prepared. You start believing that perhaps the hardest days are behind you. That maybe you have already fought your biggest battles. But life has a strange way of testing people. It does not ask whether you understand the lesson. It simply places you in front of the exact same challenge once again, and waits to see if you truly changed. And that was exactly what happened to Adam. Several months had passed since the beginning of his transformation. His life was slowly improving. He was waking up earlier. His habits were stronger. His discipline had improved. His confidence had begun returning, and for the very first time in many years, the future no longer felt dark. It felt possible. Then suddenly, opportunity appeared, a big opportunity. Perhaps the biggest one he had ever seen. It was something he had dreamed about for years. A project he genuinely believed could completely change his life. This time, he did not hesitate. This time, he committed fully. For weeks, he planned every detail. Then for months, he worked harder than he ever had before. Long nights, early mornings, constant learning, constant adjustments, constant sacrifice. And strangely, for the first time in his life, he realized he was no longer working only for the final result. He had begun enjoying the process itself, and that feeling was new. Very new. Everything looked promising. The first steps were successful. The early results looked encouraging. People around him started noticing the difference. Friends began complimenting him. Family members started speaking differently about him. Even Adam himself began feeling proud, not arrogance, not ego, something quieter. The satisfaction of knowing you are finally becoming the person you were supposed to become. And deep inside, he believed this time would be different. He believed success was finally close. He believed this chapter of suffering was ending, but life had not spoken its final word yet. One ordinary afternoon, everything changed. Adam received news he never expected. At first glance, it seemed simple, just information on a screen, a few sentences, a short message, but the impact was devastating. The project he had spent months building had failed completely, not partially, not temporarily. Everything stopped. Every plan collapsed. Every effort vanished. Months of sacrifice gone. He sat staring at the screen, reading the same words over and over, as if repetition might somehow change reality, as if perhaps he misunderstood something, but the truth remained exactly the same. The project was dead. He had lost. Again, that night. He returned home in silence. He did not turn on the lights. He did not answer messages. He ignored every call. He simply sat in darkness, exactly the way he used to months earlier. And slowly, a familiar feeling returned, one he knew too well. Disappointment. And then, he heard it. That voice. The voice he thought he had already defeated. The same voice that had followed him for years. It whispered quietly, "See? I told you from the beginning. All of this effort was pointless. You wasted your time. You are not like successful people. You are pretending to be someone you are not. You should stop now, before you embarrass yourself again." Adam sat there listening. And the worst part. A small part of him wanted to believe it, a tired part. A wounded part. A broken part. A part of him desperately wanted surrender. He remembered everything. The sleepless nights. The long hours of work. The sacrifices. The discipline. The months of effort. Then he looked at the result. Failure. Again. He could have collapsed. No one would blame him. He could have returned to his old habits. Excuses, procrastination, avoidance, running away. And honestly, most people would have understood. But there was one problem. He now knew too much. He understood himself far better than before. And once you see the truth, you can never fully lie to yourself again. 3 difficult days passed. Heavy days. Emotionally exhausting days. He had no motivation, no excitement, no energy. Even simple tasks felt unbearable. But strangely, he kept doing one thing. He kept following his routine, still waking up early, still taking walks, still writing his thoughts, still moving forward, even when he felt absolutely nothing. And on the 4th morning, something changed. He opened his notebook, picked up a pen, and wrote a question. What is different about me today compared to who I was 1 year ago? He stared at the question, then slowly began writing. 1 year ago, I used to run from failure. Today, I face it. 1 year ago, I collapsed after disappointment. Today, I am still standing. 1 year ago, I believed failure meant the end. Today, I understand it is part of the process. He stopped writing. Then suddenly, for the first time in days, he smiled, because he realized something extraordinary. Yes, the project had failed, but the person who experienced the failure was no longer the same man he used to be. And suddenly, a profound truth revealed itself. People believe success is the ultimate goal, but reality is deeper than that. Sometimes, the greatest reward you gain from any journey is not the result. It is the person you become while pursuing it. You may lose money, you may lose time, you may lose opportunities, you may lose the outcome. But if the experience transforms you, makes you stronger, makes you wiser, makes you tougher, then you did not truly lose, not completely. The following week, Adam decided to do something extremely difficult, something he used to avoid at all costs. He decided to study his own failure, not emotionally, logically. He opened every document, reviewed every decision, examined every mistake, analyzed every weak point, and honestly, it hurt. Because some mistakes were painfully obvious, mistakes that could have been avoided, errors caused by inexperience, poor decisions, lack of knowledge. But instead of punishing himself, he asked a different question. What can I learn from this? And suddenly, everything changed. Every mistake became a lesson. Every loss became information. Every setback became education. And for the first time, failure stopped looking like a monster. Instead, it began looking like a teacher, a brutal teacher, a painful teacher, but a necessary teacher, because some lessons can only be learned through suffering, and those lessons never disappear, A few days later, while walking through a quiet neighborhood, Adam noticed a small child learning to ride a bicycle. The boy fell, then stood up, fell again, stood up again, fell a third time, then a fourth, then a fifth. But something was fascinating. The child never once considered quitting. He treated falling as part of learning. And suddenly, Adam stopped walking. A strange thought entered his mind. When did we become afraid of falling? At what age did mistakes become shameful? At what point did failure begin feeling like proof of weakness? Children understand something adults forget. Every fall teaches balance. Every mistake brings improvement. Every failure moves us closer to mastery. That evening, Adam returned home thinking deeply. He opened his notebook once again, and on a blank page, he wrote one sentence. Failure is not telling me I am incapable. Failure is telling me there is a better way I still need to learn. He stared at the words for several moments, and suddenly he felt peace. Not because he had succeeded, but because he finally understood. Failure had never been his enemy. He had spent years fighting the wrong battle. His enemy was never failure itself. It was fear of failure. And there is a massive difference between the two. Failure is an event. Fear is a prison. The event ends, but the prison can last decades. That night, he stood in front of the mirror again, just as he had months earlier. But this time, he was different. He stared directly into his own eyes, then quietly said, "Yes, I lost. That is true. But I was not defeated. And there is a difference. Loss is an event. Defeat is a decision. And I have not made that decision." Then he smiled, because for the first time, those words were not motivation. They were truth. Real truth. Lived truth. Earned truth. As he turned off the lights and lay down to sleep, he knew the road ahead was still long. He knew more challenges would come, more pain, more uncertainty, more setbacks. But one thing had become certain. He no longer feared falling, because he had discovered something most people never understand. Human beings do not become strong by avoiding failure. They become strong by surviving it, by rising after it, by continuing despite its scars. But while Adam believed his greatest battles had been against fear, against failure, life was preparing another enemy, an enemy far more dangerous, an enemy that does not live in circumstances, or mistakes, or outcomes. It lives in the eyes of other people, in judgment, in criticism, in approval, in rejection, and very soon, Adam would face another prison, one that traps millions without them ever realizing it, the prison called other people's opinions. Chapter 5. The prison called other people's opinions. After everything Adam had been through, after the failures, after the painful lessons, after slowly rebuilding himself piece by piece, he genuinely believed he had become stronger. He believed he had finally begun understanding himself. He thought the hardest part of the journey was over. He thought he had broken free, but life has a strange habit. Sometimes, it waits until you believe you are free, only to reveal another prison you never knew existed. A prison more subtle than fear, more dangerous than failure, and infinitely harder to escape. It is a prison built not by walls, but by the eyes of other people, the prison called judgment. At first, Adam did not notice it. It entered quietly, disguised as caution. When he spoke during meetings, he found himself paying more attention to people's facial expressions than to his own words. When he shared an idea, he overthought every sentence, not because the idea lacked value, but because his mind immediately began asking dangerous questions. What will they think of me? Will they laugh? Will they think I sound foolish? Will they judge me if I fail again? Without realizing it, he was slowly slipping back into another prison. Only this time, the walls looked different. Adam believed he had conquered fear, but the truth was far more complicated. Fear had simply changed its form. He no longer feared failure itself. Now, he feared being seen as a failure. He no longer feared making mistakes. He feared people witnessing those mistakes. He no longer feared trying. He feared judgment. And this kind of fear is far more dangerous Because unlike obvious fear, it disguises itself as logic. It convinces you that caution is wisdom, that hiding is intelligence, that silence is safety. But slowly, it steals your identity. One evening, Adam found himself scrolling endlessly through social media, watching people his age, perfect careers, perfect bodies, perfect relationships, perfect lifestyles, perfect success stories, and with every image, something dark began growing inside him: comparison. He started measuring his own life against strangers, and the more he looked, the smaller he felt. Why is everyone ahead of me? Why do they seem happier? Why does it look so easy for them? Why am I struggling while others are winning? The questions kept growing, and with every question, his confidence quietly shrank, until suddenly he stopped, and a disturbing thought entered his mind. How much of my life has been controlled by trying to look successful in front of others? The question unsettled him, because deep inside, he already knew the answer, far too much. The next morning, something unexpected happened. Adam met an old friend he had not seen for years. They sat together at a small cafe. After some conversation, his friend asked a simple question. "So, what are you doing these days?" And suddenly, Adam hesitated, not because he lacked an answer, but because he immediately began filtering his answer. Should I make myself sound more successful? Should I exaggerate? Should I hide the parts of my life I feel insecure about? Should I create a better version of reality? And in that exact moment, he realized something uncomfortable. Even during ordinary conversation, he was constantly performing, trying to control how others perceived him, trying to earn approval, trying to avoid judgment. And suddenly he asked himself a painful question. How many of my life choices have I made? Not because I truly wanted them, but because I wanted people to admire them. The answer terrified him that night. He could not stop thinking. And slowly, memories began returning. He remembered choosing certain paths in life, simply because they looked impressive to others. He remembered abandoning dreams, because people called them unrealistic. He remembered staying silent about ideas he loved, because he feared criticism. He remembered changing parts of his personality just to fit in, and suddenly a devastating realization hit him. For years, he had not been living his own life. He had been performing for an audience, an invisible audience, always watching, always judging, always controlling him. And worst of all, most of that audience did not even care. The next day, while walking through the city, Adam noticed a street musician playing violin near a crowded intersection. The man played beautifully, yet something strange happened. Among dozens of people walking past, one man stopped, looked directly at the musician, then laughed mockingly, a cruel laugh, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Adam expected the musician to stop, to feel embarrassed, to react somehow, but instead the musician simply smiled and kept playing, completely unaffected, and that small moment fascinated Adam. Why? Because he suddenly realized something powerful. Two people had witnessed the exact same event. One person offered criticism, but the other person chose not to surrender his peace, and Adam understood something important. Other people can only control your emotions if you hand them permission. That night, he opened his notebook again and wrote something different. A question: why do I care so much about what others think? He stared at the words for a long time, then slowly began writing the truth. Because I want acceptance. Because I fear rejection. Because I want people to approve of me. Because I want validation. And suddenly he recognized the deepest problem. He'd been outsourcing his self-worth, allowing other people to determine how valuable he felt. If people approved of him, he felt confident. If people criticized him, he collapsed. If people admired him, he felt worthy. If people rejected him, he doubted himself. And suddenly, everything became painfully clear. He had placed control of his identity in other people's hands. Several days later, Adam came across a sentence inside a book. It said, "You will never be free if your happiness depends on other people's approval." He read it once, then again, then closed the book, and sat silently for nearly an hour, because he realized he had spent years building his life around invisible applause, seeking approval from people who were too busy worrying about their own lives to truly care, and in doing so, he had betrayed himself repeatedly, again and again. The following morning, Adam made another quiet decision, a powerful one. He would begin practicing discomfort. He would deliberately stop seeking approval. Small things at first. Sharing honest opinions without worrying who disagreed. Wearing what he liked instead of what looked impressive. Speaking naturally without rehearsing every sentence. Making decisions based on personal values, not social acceptance. At first, it felt terrifying. His mind screamed constantly, "What if they judge you? What if they disagree? What if they think less of you?" But he kept moving, step by step, and slowly, something extraordinary began happening. The less he depended on approval, the lighter he felt, as if invisible chains were falling away. Weeks passed, and one evening, Adam sat alone thinking about something simple. Human beings spend enormous amounts of energy trying to be liked by everyone. But the truth is brutal. No matter what you do, someone will criticize you, someone will misunderstand you, someone will dislike you, someone will judge you unfairly. It is inevitable. And if you spend your entire life trying to satisfy every opinion, you will slowly disappear. Because eventually, you stop becoming yourself, you become whatever other people expect. And that is a quiet form of self-destruction. That night, Adam opened his notebook one final time and wrote a sentence that would stay with him forever. "I was never truly afraid of failure. I was afraid of being seen failing." He stared at the words, then smiled quietly, because now he understood. The world had never imprisoned him. People had never imprisoned him. Fear had never fully imprisoned him. The prison had always been internal, the desperate need for approval. And finally, he was learning how to walk away from it. As he prepared for sleep, a strange peace settled inside him. He felt lighter, stronger, freer. But deep down, he understood something. The journey was far from over, because even after escaping fear, escaping failure, escaping judgment, there remained one final enemy, the oldest enemy of all, the enemy responsible for destroying millions of dreams before they are ever born. An enemy so quiet that most people never notice its presence. It does not attack suddenly. It slowly consumes life over years. Its name, comfort, and soon, Adam would face the most dangerous battle of all. The battle against becoming average forever. Chapter 6. The Dangerous Comfort Zone. There is a silent danger in life. A danger so deceptive, so comfortable, so subtle, that millions of people spend their entire lives trapped inside it, without ever realizing they were prisoners. It does not arrive with fear. It does not look like failure. It does not feel painful. In fact, it feels safe, warm, familiar, predictable. And perhaps that is exactly what makes it so dangerous. Its name. Comfort. And Adam was about to understand why comfort has destroyed more dreams than failure ever could. For months now, Adam had been rebuilding himself. He had fought fear. He had learned to survive failure. He had stopped depending on other people's approval. And for the first time in his adult life, he genuinely felt stronger. But strength can create a dangerous illusion. The illusion that growth is complete, that transformation has already happened, that the battle is over. And slowly, without noticing, Adam began relaxing. At first, it seemed harmless. He skipped one morning routine, then another. He delayed certain tasks, allowed small distractions back into his life, told himself things like, "I deserve rest. I have already worked hard. One day off won't hurt. I can continue tomorrow." The words sounded innocent, reasonable, normal, but something dangerous had quietly returned. The old pattern. Days passed, and the discipline he had worked months to build started weakening. The morning alarm rang. He pressed snooze. Again and again. The books he had been reading every night stayed closed on the shelf. The notebook he once filled with self-reflection began collecting dust. The healthy routines he fought hard to build slowly disappeared. And strangely, it happened so gradually, he barely noticed. That is the nature of comfort. It never attacks violently. It simply whispers. Slow down. Relax. There is no rush. You have already done enough. And while you listen, progress quietly dies. One afternoon, Adam sat alone staring at the ceiling. Something felt wrong. Deep down, he knew it. He had felt this before. This dangerous stillness. This invisible decline. It was familiar, and suddenly, a terrifying thought crossed his mind. What if success is not destroyed by dramatic failure, but by slow comfort? The idea unsettled him, because suddenly he understood something most people never realize. Life rarely collapses overnight. It declines slowly, quietly, one lazy decision at a time, one excuse at a time, one unnecessary delay at a time, until years pass, and a person wakes up realizing they became someone they never intended to become. That evening, Adam decided to leave the house and walk aimlessly through the city. His mind was restless. His thoughts were heavy. As he walked past a construction site, he stopped. Workers were building a tall structure. Large concrete foundations, steel beams rising toward the sky. He stood watching silently. And suddenly a thought entered his mind. Building something strong takes enormous effort. But destroying it can happen slowly without effort at all. Leave a building abandoned long enough, and time will destroy it naturally. The same is true for people. Growth requires effort. Decay happens automatically. And suddenly, the truth became painfully obvious. He was drifting backward again, not because he had failed, but because he had stopped pushing forward. That night, he opened his notebook after weeks of ignoring it, and on a blank page, he wrote one sentence: "Comfort is the slow death of potential." He stared at the words, and memories began flooding back. He remembered childhood dreams, the ambitions he once carried, the promises he had made to himself, the person he wanted to become, and suddenly, he asked himself a terrifying question. How many people spend their entire lives settling for far less than what they were capable of becoming? The answer frightened him. Millions. Perhaps billions. Not because they lacked ability, not because they lacked opportunity, but because they became comfortable. And comfort slowly convinced them to stop growing. The next morning, Adam made a decision, a difficult one. He would intentionally make life uncomfortable again. He would train himself to stop worshiping comfort. So he created small challenges: cold showers, long morning runs, reading when he wanted entertainment, working when he wanted rest, speaking when silence felt easier, choosing discipline when comfort invited laziness. At first, it was miserable. Every part of him resisted. His mind fought back aggressively. Why are you doing this? Why suffer unnecessarily? Why make life harder? But Adam had finally understood something powerful. Comfort feels good temporarily, but discipline creates freedom permanently, and there is a massive difference between the two. Weeks passed, and slowly, he noticed something fascinating. Every time he deliberately chose discomfort, his confidence increased. Every difficult thing he completed strengthened his sense of identity. And eventually, pain stopped feeling like punishment. Instead, it began feeling like growth. Because he realized something profound. Human beings are not designed for endless comfort. They are built through challenge. Just like muscles grow through resistance, character grows through difficulty, and the absence of challenge weakens the soul. One rainy evening, Adam sat quietly remembering people he admired most in history: athletes, inventors, writers, leaders, artists. Every extraordinary human being shared one truth: none of them lived easy lives. None of them became great by seeking comfort. Every great life was built through repeated discomfort, repeated sacrifice, repeated discipline, repeated struggle, and suddenly, he understood why average lives are so common. Because average requires no effort. It asks nothing from you. You simply follow comfort, and average becomes your destination automatically. Late that night, Adam stood in front of the mirror again. This had become a strange ritual now, a place where truth revealed itself. He looked directly into his own eyes and quietly said, "The world will always offer comfort. Comfort will always invite me backward. But I now understand something I never understood before. Comfort is not peace. Comfort is stagnation. Growth begins where comfort ends, and I refuse to live an average life, not anymore." That night before sleeping, he opened his notebook one final time and wrote a sentence that would permanently shape his future. Easy choices create hard lives. Hard choices create strong lives. He smiled, closed the notebook, and turned off the light. For the first time, he understood something few people ever learn. The greatest danger in life is not failure. It is not fear. It is not criticism. It is not rejection. The greatest danger is becoming comfortable with living below your potential, because once comfort becomes identity, dreams quietly disappear forever. But Adam's journey was still incomplete, because after defeating fear, failure, judgment, and comfort, one final enemy remained, the oldest enemy inside every human being, an enemy responsible for destroying more futures than any force on earth, an enemy invisible to almost everyone, and yet it controls millions every single day. Its name, the mind itself, and soon Adam would face the hardest battle of his entire life, the battle against his own thoughts. Chapter 7. The the mind. There is truth most people spend their entire lives avoiding, a truth so uncomfortable, so terrifying, that many choose distraction over facing it. The truth is this: the greatest battle you will ever fight will never be against the world. It will never be against failure. It will never be against difficult circumstances. It will never even be against other people. Your greatest battle will always be against your own mind. And Adam was finally approaching the hardest chapter of his life. Because after months of rebuilding himself, after fighting fear, escaping the prison of other people's opinions, breaking destructive habits, and learning discipline, he had started believing he was finally becoming unstoppable. But then something unexpected happened. The enemy did not come from outside, it came from within. Again, it started subtly, small thoughts, quiet whispers inside his mind. Nothing dramatic at first, just tiny fragments of negativity. What if none of this lasts? What if I eventually fall back again? What if all this progress disappears? What if I am only pretending to change? The thoughts came quietly, harmless at first, almost invisible, but slowly they multiplied. One thought became 10. 10 became 100, and before he realized what was happening, Adam found himself trapped inside endless mental noise. And the strange part was this: nothing bad had happened externally. Life was stable. His routines were strong. His discipline remained intact. Yet internally, chaos had returned. One evening, Adam sat alone in complete silence. No phone, no music, no distractions, just himself and the storm inside his own head. Thought after thought kept arriving without permission. Memories, regrets, worst-case scenarios, imaginary failures, old insecurities, future worries, everything at once. And suddenly, a realization struck him. For years I believed external problems were ruining my peace, but perhaps my own mind has always been the loudest source of suffering. The thought disturbed him deeply, because suddenly he understood something terrifying. Human beings can survive external pain remarkably well, but internal suffering can destroy a person slowly for decades, and the mind can become the cruelest enemy imaginable. The following day, Adam visited a bookstore. He wandered without purpose, until one particular sentence written on the cover of a psychology book caught his attention. It said, "You do not experience life as it is. You experience life as your mind interprets it." He stood frozen, reading the sentence repeatedly. Then suddenly everything began connecting. Two people can experience the exact same event, yet suffer completely different realities. One person sees opportunity. Another sees danger. One sees possibility. Another sees failure. One sees challenge. Another sees defeat. The world itself remains unchanged. The difference exists only in perception, and perception lives entirely inside the mind. That evening, Adam remembered one of the darkest periods of his life. Years earlier, he had spent months believing he was falling behind everyone around him. He convinced himself he was a failure, that he had wasted too much time, that success had become impossible. And because he believed those thoughts, his behavior changed. He stopped trying, stopped learning, stopped taking risks, stopped growing. Eventually, his reality began matching his beliefs, not because life had decided his future, but because his thoughts had shaped his actions, and his actions had shaped his life. And suddenly, he saw the terrifying pattern. Thought becomes belief. Belief becomes behavior. Behavior becomes identity. Identity becomes destiny. And most people never notice this process happening. Late that night, Adam sat in darkness, thinking deeply. Then a question entered his mind. If thoughts shape reality, why do I trust every thought I have? The question changed everything. Because suddenly he realized something obvious. Not every thought deserves belief. The mind generates endless noise every day. Thousands of thoughts. Some rational, some irrational, some useful, some destructive. And yet, most people automatically believe everything their mind says. Imagine blindly trusting a stranger who constantly lies to you. Sounds absurd. And yet, people do exactly that with their own thoughts every single day, the next morning. Adam decided to experiment. Instead of automatically believing every thought, he would begin observing them. Like an outsider, a silent witness, throughout the day. He noticed astonishing patterns. When he made a mistake, the mind instantly attacked. You always ruin everything. When something felt difficult, the mind whispered, you are not capable enough. When uncertainty appeared, the mind predicted disaster. This will fail. This will end badly. You should stop now. And suddenly Adam understood something powerful. His thoughts were not objective truth. They were habits. Mental habits built over years. Automatic programs running inside his subconscious. And most of them were deeply flawed. Days later, while sitting in a park, he watched clouds moving slowly across the sky. And strangely, a beautiful thought entered his mind. Thoughts are like clouds. They appear, they move, then disappear, but the sky remains untouched. Perhaps consciousness works the same way. Thoughts come and go constantly. But I do not have to become every thought that appears inside my mind. The realization felt revolutionary. For years, he had identified with every thought, every fear, every insecurity, every negative idea as if they defined who he was. But perhaps thoughts are merely visitors, temporary visitors, not identity, not truth, not destiny. Over the next several weeks, Adam developed a strange practice. Whenever destructive thoughts appeared, he no longer said, I'm a failure. Instead, he would say, I noticed that my mind is producing thoughts about failure. The difference sounded small, but psychologically, it changed everything. Because now, he was separating himself from the thought, observing instead of obeying, watching instead of becoming. And gradually, the thoughts began losing power, because thoughts only control people who automatically believe them. One evening, Adam remembered something fascinating. For years, he had fought external enemies. Fear, failure, judgment, comfort, but perhaps none of those were ever the real enemy. Perhaps the true battlefield had always existed inside his own head. And suddenly he understood why so many people never reach their potential. It is not because they lack talent. It is not because opportunities disappear. It is not because life is unfair. It is because their own thoughts quietly sabotage them every single day, and most never notice it happening. That night, Adam stood before the mirror once again. But tonight felt different. Tonight, he was facing the oldest enemy he had ever known, his own mind. He stared at himself for a long moment, then slowly said, You have lied to me for years. You taught me fear. You convinced me I was weak. You made me believe failure defined me. You told me comfort was safety. You taught me to seek approval. But now, I understand the truth. You are not my master. You are only a tool. And from this day forward, I decide what deserves belief, not you. Silence filled the room, and for the first time his mind felt quiet, not permanently, but enough to feel peace. Before sleeping, he opened his notebook, turned to a blank page, and wrote perhaps the most important sentence of his entire journey. The mind is a powerful servant, but a dangerous master. He stared at the words for several seconds, then smiled softly, because finally he understood. Freedom is not controlling the world. Freedom is learning how to control your own thoughts, and the person who masters the mind can survive almost anything life throws at them. But Adam's story was still not finished, because one final lesson remained. The lesson that separates ordinary people from extraordinary ones, a lesson hidden in one simple truth. The battle never ends. Growth never ends. And becoming who you are capable of becoming is a lifelong decision. The final chapter was waiting, and it would change everything forever. Chapter 8. The final decision. There comes a moment in every human life, a moment far more important than success, far more important than talent, far more important than opportunity. A moment where a person must answer one simple question: who am I choosing to become? Not tomorrow, not someday, now. Because in the end, life is nothing more than a collection of decisions, thousands of invisible choices repeated over years. And eventually, those choices become identity. Identity becomes character. Character becomes destiny. And Adam was finally standing at that moment. The moment where everything he had learned, everything he had suffered through, everything he had discovered about himself would come together. Not as theory, not as inspiration, but as a permanent decision. Months had passed since the night his journey began. That lonely night, when he sat in darkness, surrounded by unfinished dreams and abandoned ambitions. Back then, he was exhausted, lost, confused, a prisoner of fear, a prisoner of self-doubt, a man slowly disappearing beneath the weight of his own thoughts. But now, something was different. The outside world had not magically changed. Life was still difficult. Problems still existed. Challenges still waited ahead. Nothing about reality had become easier. And yet, for the first time in years, he no longer felt powerless, because he had discovered the truth most people spend their entire lives avoiding. The real enemy had never been outside. It had always been inside. He had learned difficult lessons. Fear was never the true danger. The danger was allowing fear to make decisions for you. Failure was never destruction. The destruction came when failure convinced you to stop trying. Other people's opinions were never prison. The prison existed when you surrendered your identity to their approval. Comfort was never peace. Comfort became dangerous the moment it stopped growth. The mind itself was never the enemy. It became dangerous only when left uncontrolled. And suddenly everything connected, every lesson, every failure, every painful experience, every uncomfortable truth, all pointing toward one conclusion: the greatest battle in life has always been internal. One quiet afternoon, Adam sat alone watching the sunset. The sky burned orange and gold across the horizon. The city moved around him, cars passing, people walking, conversations happening everywhere, ordinary life. But inside, he felt extraordinary stillness, and for the first time, he allowed himself to look backward. He thought about the younger version of himself, the boy who once believed the world belonged to him, the teenager whose confidence slowly collapsed under failure, the young man who spent years running from fear, the version of himself who watched opportunities disappear because doubt had become stronger than courage. He remembered every moment, every excuse, every delay, every lie he had told himself, and strangely he felt no anger, no regret, no shame, only understanding. Because now he realized something beautiful. Every painful chapter had been necessary. Even suffering had purpose. Because pain had forced him to wake up, and without pain, transformation never would have begun. As the sun slowly disappeared, a thought entered his mind. Perhaps life was never meant to become easy. Perhaps the purpose of life was never comfort. Perhaps success itself was never the true destination. Maybe the real purpose was becoming stronger, becoming wiser, becoming conscious, learning how to master yourself. Because what value is success if you remain weak internally? What value is wealth if fear still controls your decisions? What value is achievement if your own thoughts remain your prison? And Adam understood something powerful. Winning in life is not about defeating the world. It is about learning how to defeat the parts of yourself that keep destroying your future. That night, he returned home, walked toward the mirror, and stood there quietly. This mirror had witnessed every stage of his transformation. It had seen fear, weakness, failure, doubt, pain, growth, awareness, discipline, and tonight, for the first time, he no longer saw the broken version of himself. He saw someone new, not perfect, not extraordinary, not fearless, but awake, and awareness changes everything. He stared into his own eyes and began speaking, slowly, deliberately, as if speaking directly to every past version of himself. I understand now. I understand why I stayed stuck for so many years. I understand why fear controlled me. I understand why failure hurt me so deeply. I understand why I spent years seeking approval. I understand why comfort nearly destroyed my future. I understand why my own thoughts became my prison. But now, I know something far more important. None of those things define me, not fear, not failure, not criticism, not comfort, not my past, not my mistakes, not my thoughts. None of them decide who I become, only I decide that. Silence filled the room, and slowly, a strange emotion rose inside him. It was not confidence. It was not motivation. It was something deeper, ownership, for the first time in his life. He felt ownership over himself, ownership over his future, ownership over his choices, ownership over the direction of his life. And once a person truly takes responsibility, transformation becomes inevitable. Because excuses lose power, blame disappears, victimhood dies, and growth begins permanently. He walked toward the desk, opened the notebook that had traveled with him through every chapter of his transformation, turned to the final empty page, and sat quietly for several minutes, thinking carefully, because he knew this final sentence mattered, more than anything he had written before. Then slowly, he picked up the pen and wrote, "The world never defeated me. Fear never defeated me. Failure never defeated me. My past never defeated me. I was only defeated whenever I chose surrender." Then he paused, read the sentence, and added one final line beneath it. "And from this day forward, I choose differently." Hours later, lying in bed, he stared into darkness, but tonight felt different. The darkness no longer felt heavy. It no longer felt frightening, because now he understood something few people ever truly understand. There will always be more battles, more fear, more failure, more uncertainty, more painful seasons. Life will continue testing him, again and again and again. But none of that frightened him anymore, because the greatest transformation had already happened. He had stopped seeing himself as weak. And once a person changes the way they see themselves, everything begins changing. Perhaps this story was never truly about Adam. Perhaps it was always about you, because somewhere, at this very moment, someone listening to these words is fighting the same battle. Someone is trapped by fear. Someone has been defeated by failure. Someone is imprisoned by other people's opinions. Someone has become too comfortable. Someone is losing the war against their own mind, and maybe that person is you. But understand this. Your life is not over. Your mistakes do not define you. Your past does not imprison you. Your fear is not permanent. Your thoughts are not destiny. And no matter how long you have been stuck, change remains possible the moment you decide, not when conditions improve, not when motivation arrives, not when life becomes easier, the moment you decide, because everything begins with one decision, a quiet decision, a private decision, a decision nobody else can make for you, the decision to finally say, enough. No more excuses, no more fear, no more surrender, no more running, and then to say the words that change everything forever, the words that begin every transformation, the words that separate ordinary lives from extraordinary futures, the words that define true freedom. You will not defeat me anymore. Not fear, not failure, not comfort, not doubt, not the past, not the world, and not even my own mind, because from this moment forward I choose who I become, and I choose to rise again and again and again until the very end, forever, because the battle never truly ends. But neither does growth, and the people who change the world are simply those who made one decision long ago, a decision repeated every single day, no matter what life threw at them. The decision to keep going, the decision to keep rising, the decision to never surrender, the decision to become stronger than the person they used to be, and above all else, the decision to say, I refuse to be defeated anymore.
This was a summary of today's book from the Beacon of Books channel. If you liked the video, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to receive all the new content.